They say you never really know your family until money is involved. I used to think that was something bitter people said to make themselves feel better. I believed blood meant loyalty, that history meant trust, that parents were the one place in the world where you were safe from being used. I was wrong. And I didn't realize how wrong I was until the afternoon my mother called me laughing, as if she were sharing a joke, and thanked me for a wedding gift I never agreed to give. My name is Lena Harper. I was 31 years old when I found out my parents had sold my apartment without my consent to pay for my stepsister's $150,000 wedding. Not borrowed against it, not asked me for help, sold it, signed my name, took the money, and told themselves I would understand because I always did. If you want the full truth, hit like so this story reaches more people. The call came while I was sitting at my desk, half focused on an email I'd already read 3 times. My mother's voice was bright, almost giddy. She said my stepsister's wedding was going to be perfect now, absolutely perfect, and that they couldn't have done it without me. I remember blinking at my screen, confused, waiting for the part that would make sense. When I asked what she meant, there was a pause, then a soft laugh, the kind adults use when they think someone is being slow. She told me they de-sold my apartment. She said it like she was telling me they'd returned a sweater. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt something hollow out in my chest, like a wall had collapsed silently. That apartment wasn't just a place I lived. It was 8 years of overtime, skipped vacations, cheap groceries, and saying no when everyone else said yes. It was proof that I could build something on my own, even after my family taught me I was always supposed to come second. They told me it was temporary, that I could stay with them for a while, that my stepsister needed this more than I did. She was sensitive, they said. She had a hard life. I was strong. I always landed on my feet. Those words had followed me my entire life, and suddenly I understood what they really meant. Strong meant expendable. Capable meant convenient. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye and sat there staring at the wall, realizing 2 things at once. First, they truly believed they'd done nothing wrong. And second, they had no idea what I was about to do next. I need to explain how we got here, because what they did didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of years of quiet conditioning, of being taught exactly how much space I was allowed to take up in my own family. My stepsister, Ava, came into our lives when I was 12. My father remarried after my biological mother passed, and suddenly our house revolved around making sure Ava felt welcome, secure, loved. At least that's how it was framed. In reality, it meant every sharp edge of life was filed down for her while I was expected to adapt. Ava was emotional. Ava was fragile. Ava needed understanding. I apparently needed resilience. If Ava forgot her homework, teachers were called. If I forgot mine, it was a lesson in responsibility. If Ava wanted something extracurricular, the money was found. If I wanted the same, I was told we had to be practical. My parents didn't call it favoritism. They called it fairness, because fairness, in their minds, meant giving more to the one who complained louder. By the time I was in college, I had learned how to survive quietly. I worked 2 part-time jobs. I paid my own fees. When I landed my first real job after graduation, my parents told everyone how proud they were, but somehow that pride never came with support. When Ava dropped out of school twice and found herself in expensive cities, my parents helped cover her rent. When I saved for years to put a down payment on a modest apartment, they asked if she could stay with me for a few months, just until she got back on her feet. She never did. She moved out when she met her fiancé, Ethan, a man from a wealthy family with a last name my parents said like it tasted expensive. From that moment on, Ava's wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was an opportunity, a performance, proof that our family was successful, generous, impressive, and performances cost money they didn't have. I didn't know any of this when they asked me, years earlier, to keep my apartment paperwork in their safe. They said it was safer there. They said it was just in case. I trusted them because they were my parents and because I'd been trained to trust them even when it wasn't logical. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly. They weren't wondering if they could sell my apartment. They were deciding when. They assumed I would bend because I always had. They assumed silence meant consent. They assumed wrong. Comment justice if you believe she deserved justice. By the time I stood up from my desk that afternoon, my shock had hardened into something else. Not rage, not yet. Resolve. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to find out exactly what they had done, how they had done it, and whether they'd made the mistake of thinking I was still the girl who wouldn't push back. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch, surrounded by boxes I'd never unpacked because some part of me had always feared stability, replaying the call in my head. The laughter, the certainty, the way my mother said my name as if it were already settled. I opened my laptop and started pulling up every document I could find. Bank statements, emails, old scanned copies of contracts. The more I looked, the clearer it became that this hadn't been impulsive. It had been planned. The next morning, I called the title company listed on a document I didn't even remember receiving. The woman on the phone was polite until I explained who I was. Then her tone changed. She asked me to hold. When she came back, she told me there were discrepancies with the signature on file, that the closing hadn't finalized yet, that legally, the sale was frozen. Relief washed over me so fast my hands started shaking. They hadn't gotten away with it, not yet, but relief was quickly replaced by anger, sharp and focused. They hadn't just crossed a line, they'd committed fraud, and they'd done it while smiling, convinced I'd clean up the mess like I always did. That's when another realization hit me, one that made my stomach drop. If they were willing to sell my home without asking, what else had they lied about? What stories had they been telling with my sacrifices stitched quietly into the background? I called my aunt, the only relative who had ever looked at me like I mattered. Her silence when I explained everything told me more than words could. Then she said something that changed everything. She told me my parents had been telling people Ava was helping them financially for years. That Ava was generous, responsible, the one holding the family together. I felt sick, because I knew that wasn't true. I'd been sending my parents money every month for 4 years to help with their mortgage after my father's failed business venture. I never told anyone. I didn't want praise. I didn't want guilt. I just didn't want them to lose their house. Somewhere along the way, Ava had seen the transfers, the amounts, the consistency, and instead of telling the truth, she'd taken the credit. She'd let them believe she was the savior while I stayed invisible. Type yes if you want to see all targets hit at once. In that moment, the story stopped being about an apartment. It became about erasure, about watching someone else wear a life you paid for and smiling while they did it. I realized if I stayed quiet now, I wasn't just losing my home. I was agreeing to disappear entirely. I drove to my parents' house that evening without calling ahead. The porch light was on, the same warm yellow glow I'd grown up associating with safety. It felt ironic now. My mother opened the door with a smile that faltered the moment she saw my face. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked in and sat at the kitchen table like I still belonged there. My father was sorting through papers, wedding invoices, floral deposits, venue fees. He looked up, irritated, as if I were interrupting something important. I asked them one simple question, keeping my voice steady. How had Ava been paying their mortgage for the last 4 years on a salary that barely covered her own rent? My mother lit up instantly. She said Ava had been incredible, so selfless, sending money every month without fail. She said it proudly, like she was reciting a story she loved telling. My father nodded along. Neither of them noticed my hands curling into fists under the table. Ava walked in halfway through the conversation. She froze when she saw me, then recovered quickly, pasting on that soft, practiced smile. When I repeated the question, she didn't hesitate. She said yes, she'd been helping. She said it was what family did. She looked directly at me when she said it, daring me to contradict her. That was the moment something inside me snapped cleanly into place. Not anger, clarity. She wasn't confused. She wasn't mistaken. She was counting on me to stay quiet, just like always. I stood up and left without another word. Behind me, my mother called my name, already framing me as difficult, dramatic, ungrateful. I didn't turn around. That night, I met with a lawyer friend who specialized in property law. I laid everything out, the forged signature, the frozen sale, the mortgage payments, the lies. She confirmed what I already suspected. What my parents had done was a felony. What Ava had done was sustained fraud, and if I wanted, I could press charges against all of them. Share this video so communities understand what was hiding. I sat there listening, nodding, feeling strangely calm. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And truth, once spoken out loud, has a way of rearranging everything. We started gathering evidence. Bank statements, email confirmations, old messages from my parents promising they'd never touch my property without asking. Screenshots from a family group chat Ava had forgotten to remove my lawyer friend from, where Ava casually assured them I wouldn't make a fuss. She never does. Reading that sentence felt like looking at myself through someone else's eyes and realizing how small I'd allowed myself to become. The wedding was 10 days away. 10 days until 200 people would gather to celebrate a story built on my silence. And for the first time in my life, I decided I wasn't going to play my assigned role. The days leading up to the wedding felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. My parents sent group texts about seating charts and menu choices as if nothing had happened. Ava sent me a picture of the bridesmaid dress she'd chosen for me, pale and unflattering, insisting it would blend beautifully with the theme. I knew what that meant. Don't draw attention. Don't exist too loudly. I let them think everything was fine. I answered politely. I didn't argue. Silence this time wasn't submission, it was strategy. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up in my apartment. Still mine. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. On my bed lay the dress, my shoes, and a slim folder I'd prepared carefully. Inside it were copies of the deed, the canceled sale, 4 years of bank statements, and printed emails promising they'd never touch my property. The weight of that folder felt heavier than paper. It felt like truth. The venue was a private estate outside the city, the kind of place people rented to look important. White flowers everywhere. A string quartet. Valets. I arrived quietly and took my seat, watching my parents move through the crowd, glowing with pride. I heard my mother telling someone how generous Ava was, how she'd sacrificed so much for the family. My father nodded along, basking in admiration that wasn't earned. Ava looked radiant, confident, untouchable. When she caught my eye, she smiled the same way she always had, certain I would never challenge her in public. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows, applause, tears. By the time the reception began, the room was buzzing with champagne and compliments. My father stood to give a toast. He talked about family, about sacrifice, about how proud he was of his daughters. Then he thanked Ava for supporting them financially and me for giving up my apartment so her sister could have her dream wedding. The room erupted in applause. 200 faces turned toward me, smiling expectantly. I stood. The silence that followed was immediate and complete. I asked for the microphone. My father hesitated, then handed it over, still smiling. I thanked him and turned to face the room. My voice was calm, clear. I said I needed to clarify something. I said I hadn't given my apartment. I said I hadn't sold it. I said my parents had forged my signature and tried to sell it without my consent. Gasps rippled through the room. I held up the deed. I held up the canceled contract. I said the sale was illegal and the money they were counting on wasn't coming. I said the apartment was mine and always had been. Then I turned to Ava and explained, quietly, that I had been paying our parents' mortgage for 4 years, that every payment came from my account, that she had taken credit for my sacrifice. If this shocked you, comment respect below. The room exploded into whispers. Ava's face drained of color. Her fiancé stepped back from her, confusion and disbelief written across his face. My parents looked small for the first time in my life. I set the microphone down and walked away before anyone could stop me. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. The truth had been dropped like a stone into still water, and I knew the ripples would reach every corner of that room without me standing there to witness it. As I walked past the tables and out into the cool evening air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not triumphant, not cruelly satisfied, just finished. My phone started vibrating before I even reached my car. I didn't look at it. I already knew who it would be. Behind me, voices were rising, overlapping, the carefully curated fantasy collapsing in real time. I heard someone say my name sharply. I heard someone else crying. I kept walking. I drove for nearly 20 minutes before pulling over. My hands were shaking then, not from fear, but from release. For so long, my life had been about managing other people's comfort, absorbing their expectations, shrinking myself so no one else had to feel awkward or guilty. Standing up there with that microphone hadn't felt like revenge. It felt like oxygen. Over the next few days, the story spread faster than I expected. Videos from the reception surfaced online. People I barely knew messaged me to say they'd always sensed something was wrong. Ava's fiancé moved out that same night. I heard later that his family was pursuing an annulment. Apparently, honesty mattered to them more than appearances. My parents didn't call for 2 days. When they finally did, their voices sounded different. Smaller. My father asked how I could embarrass them like that. My mother cried and said she never meant to hurt me. I listened quietly, then told them something I'd never said before. I told them I wasn't responsible for managing the consequences of their choices. I told them I was done paying their mortgage. I told them I needed distance. They didn't understand. They still don't. But understanding was never the prerequisite for my boundaries. Respect was. Ava sent a long message, full of apologies that centered on her loss, her humiliation, her future. I read it once and didn't reply. Silence, this time, wasn't a weakness. It was a decision. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my own sense of stability. I repainted the apartment. I bought furniture I actually liked instead of what was practical. I took my first real vacation in years. Every small choice felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away without realizing it. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the city lights come on, my phone buzzed again. A message from Ava, shorter this time. She said she was starting therapy. She said she finally understood how much she'd taken. She asked if we could talk someday. I didn't answer right away. Healing, I was learning, isn't about rushing toward reconciliation. It's about making sure you don't abandon yourself again in the process. I don't know what my relationship with my family will look like in the future. What I do know is this. Silence doesn't make you noble. It makes you invisible. And being strong doesn't mean being endlessly available to people who take without asking. For the first time in my life, my home feels like more than walls and furniture. It feels like proof. Proof that I can choose myself. Proof that I don't need permission to be respected. I used to believe that being the bigger person meant staying quiet, smoothing things over, letting time erase what people refused to acknowledge. That belief cost me years of my life. It cost me money, energy, self-respect, and a version of myself that thought love was something you earned by being useful. Standing up at that wedding didn't magically fix everything, but it changed the direction of my life in a way nothing else ever had. A few months later, my parents' house was sold. Without my help, the numbers didn't work anymore. They downsized into a small rental across town. I heard they were embarrassed that people asked questions they didn't know how to answer. For the first time, they were forced to sit with the reality they'd spent decades avoiding. Ava had to face her own reality, too. Without borrowed praise and stolen credit, life became very real very fast. A modest paycheck, real bills, no one cushioning the fall. We haven't become a happy, healed family. This isn't that kind of story. There were apologies, some sincere, some clumsy. There were long silences. There were moments I almost went back to being the one who fixed everything, simply because it felt familiar. But I didn't. Familiar isn't the same as healthy. What surprised me most was how peaceful my life became once I stopped over-explaining myself. Once I stopped trying to make people understand why what they did hurt. The right people didn't need convincing. They saw it. They respected it. And the ones who didn't quietly drifted out of my life. I learned that boundaries aren't punishments. They're instructions. They teach people how you expect to be treated, and they teach you how to treat yourself. I also learned that truth doesn't need volume to be powerful. It just needs witnesses. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of yourself in my story, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not selfish for protecting what you worked for. You are not dramatic for refusing to be used. And you are not cruel for choosing yourself after years of being the afterthought. If this story hit close to home, like this video so more people who need to hear it can find it. I'm curious, what boundary did you have to learn the hard way? Share it in the comments. And if you want more stories where the truth finally comes out and silence is broken for good, subscribe. You're not alone, and you don't have to stay invisible anymore.